A sophomore album is a big step for a lot of artists. Artists have something to prove. They say it takes 10 years to write your first album and 1 to 2 years to write your second. And that is invariably true with Lex the Lexicon Artists' sophomore LP, Alter Ego. This is Nerd Music and Judgement, a Dying of Exposure series, and my name is Steve, here to review this second full-length album from Lex the Lexicon Artist. To understand Alter Ego, you have to go back and listen to Raging Ego. Raging Ego is a shorter album. It's only 11 tracks long, 2 of which are remixes, and definitely delivers a bunch of short, punchy songs that kind of have a lot more fun and bravado to them than Alter Ego would imply. Raging Ego came out in June 2018, and nearly exactly 2 years later, in March 2020, we get Alter Ego. Now, 2 years doesn't seem like a lot of time, but in the case of Lex the Lexicon Artist, there's been multiple national tours, multiple large festival appearances, and a complete change in coasts that they live in. 2 years is a lifetime in this case, and you can tell on the album. Alter Ego is a companion piece to Raging Ego. Yes, there have been other EPs and singles and small projects in between, but these two are tied very close together. As Lex's aged, she's had a little bit more to say. Alter Ego is a 16-track album. There are no remixes on that 16-track album, and the album as a whole feels more of a piece together when it comes to instrumentation, or rather more the tone of the instrumentation. Now we're going to get into the track-by-track breakdown, but what I wanted to talk about first was the overall feeling of strength and improvement that has come from Alter Ego. I loved Raging Ego when it came out. I loved Lex the first time I heard her. First time I saw her live, she was a very strong live act. There's a bit of bias here because this is an artist I already like. However, when it comes to the mechanics of rapping, the structure of flow, the depth of a song, the ability to put together an LP as a large piece, the ability to get the words out of your mouth in the way that you want them on the recording, Alter Ego is simply a superior album across the board from Raging Ego. That's not to say Raging Ego was a bad album. Alter Ego is just better. Now, we're going to get into the specific track. It opens up with a track called Question. This is an intro with a huge bass on it, a big wide kick, and a big slap snare. There's a lot of space in this, which gives Lex time to rap. What Lex chooses to do, rather than the normal fast, rapid fire words that they tend to use, is go with short, patterned, exact 8-bar verses, then into the chorus. The chorus is a call out to the industry about caring about their music. Have they heard of her? Are they aware of her? Are they putting her up yet? This is a strange little 2-minute song to open a Lexicon album or EP with, but it does work, and it works better the moment you hear the second song on the album. This almost plays like a false intro, and there's going to be some conversation about how this album goes from track to track, misleading you in one direction and then bringing you back in the other, both within tracks and between tracks themselves. So we move on to I Know. I Know, for me, feels like the actual intro. The beat is a bit more complicated. It's still dark, but with high end and mixed in discordant keys. It draws more personally from life moments over the last couple years. It feels like a day in the life, but delivered with a kind of an exasperated spin, acknowledging that there are fans and venues and other artists that are like, oh, you're great, we're here to support you, but are they actually putting in the money or inviting her back to tour or inviting collaboration? Where is that real depth? And the fact that she's heard it all before and will hear it again. And that doesn't make it necessarily a bad thing, but she's not as enthusiastic to hear it. It's a song that only a touring artist could really have released, and it's very good. But here's the deal. It has a nice little tail end trick where they acknowledge that they've heard this all before and maybe they don't want to hear it again. And then they're just like, kidding, you can say it. That kind of lightens the mood, and it's a consistent touch through the album that occasionally Lex will cut through these sort of minor key, discordant, kind of darker beats or off-kilter beats or sadder beats and give it a bit of levity. That leads us into another shift. The Redesign is another melancholy song, but it's not nearly as aggressively dark. And it has a bit of boom bap sadness and underlying soft synth highs that feel less like a big production and more like a I'm gonna start spitting bars on this verse. There's no chorus on the track, which allows the instrumental to be super off kilter and have that unease. This track features Kelsey, but with a wholly different flow style, which is of course consistent with Kelsey. This is a classic nerdcore song, in a way. It's sort of an addiction to technology, talking about phone, but it does a flavoring of it with toxic relationships and dependencies. And that's really enhanced by having Kelsey as the guest rapper, as the phone or the toxic relationship. It plays it better both ways. It's pretty clearly leaning toward phone, but it's definitely not about a relationship. And that's part of that twist and turn thing that Alter Ego does, the sort of two-sidedness that bounces around this entire album and is consistent with the title of the album. We move on to the next track, Info Sessions with Cloth and Pop. This so far is the poppiest track. It doesn't seem to be about the music business specifically. It actually seems to be about tech and potentially business and the rat race and the grinding it out on the job market, and how Lex could only base it on her reality. I, Steve, could not rap a song about seeing a bunch of Asian people in a room and feeling like I was part of that community. So the acknowledgement of seeing yourself in other people and not necessarily wanting to be part of that, but also potentially wanting to be part of that, and whether or not that is bad or good is sort of left up in the air on this. And it's really powerful. And whereas it might not be written about the music business, it absolutely could be applied to the music business. It's just in this case, we have to empathize with that across to Lex's personal experience, which I can only assume comes off of her initial job market searches. Klopp's verse is pitch perfect on this. He has a great, almost malevolent undertone to his voice, just in the sort of level of ego and overconfidence of his character that he's playing as sort of the business or the industry. And it really plays well here. The tracks keep moving upward in strength when we get to All the Time with Atlas. Now, I'm going to be clear. This is still early. I've only listened to this album about 10, 15 times. For me, that means I still haven't sussed out exactly what my favorite track is for the end-all, be-all, the thing I will always claim is the best track of the album. But All the Time is definitely the front runner. It jumped out immediately. The beat is fantastic. It's produced by Atlas, and it sounds good. It's got a fuzzy chip and a minor, which works to express the struggle and dirge of the theme. Then we have a deliberate delivery is there again from the intro onto the beginning of the verse, and then it continues into a chop mid-verse that really works. Then Atlas chorus comes in, and it is stellar. It is an out-of-this-world radio single chorus. Then we jump back into a fast, complicated, fantastic flow where the rushing of the flow seems to match with the rushing of the thoughts and the struggle and the internal interplay between understanding you need to move on from someone or something. And there we have the point again. This track, once more, does a great job at the vague play on whether it's truly the fame or the need for a romantic relationship holding Lexicon back. as the artist and creator, she knows what the song's about, but she leaves enough for the audience to decide what it's about. Is this about being held back by her need for fame, her need for approval, her need for popularity in the way of creating and becoming the best artist she is? Is it about the fact that she might want that relationship? She might want that connection. She might want that connection back with someone that she's left behind, but acknowledges that by sacrificing a part of her life to that part of her need, she will slow her progression in her own career. Fan-god-damn-tastic. Love it. Had a problem where whenever I would try to write notes on this album, I would have to listen to that song like 3 times in a row. Self-Care with Michael Kill and Shubs is a nice turn as well. It's gonna juke left and just be a very simple song about self-care. It's kind of perfect to have Michael Kill and Shubzilla on this track, since both of them are very open about needing to take care of themselves for different historical and current reasons. It's a good little posse track. The beat is grimy with some high accents that return the track to the unease of the other tracks, matching a verse delivery from Lexicon to Shubs to Michael Kill. And it's a nice in-between, almost conjunctive track into the strangest track on this album, which is funny because it would have fit in perfectly with Raging Ego, Party Hop. This has D&D Sluggers on guitar, and it's produced by Klopp, and it's a lot of live instruments. Lexicon threw this out as the first single of the album, and it was definitely a misdirect, which again is consistent with what Alter Ego is, a misdirect, an ego or a self that you don't show everybody. It's much bouncier. In an interview with Lexicon, I discovered this track was written back in like 2017, before the rest of the album, and you can kind of tell. It's about bouncing between different parties, hopping party to party, moving across, and it's really funnily plays with the reality of her moving as an artist from the Bay Area all the way to the other side of the country in New York. It's super SoCal 90s. It's super catchy. It's super bouncy SoCal mid 90s. It's mostly singing, and you can really just kind of feel the groove of it, especially with all that live instrumentation and production. It's a fun break on an album that has some serious emotional delving and self-reflection through it. And that's when we get to Alter Ego, the title track. Alter Ego is with Schaefer, the Dark Lord, and it is rapped to match him. Now, Lex the Lexicon Artist does not sound like Schaefer, the Dark Lord, but she could sound like Schaefer if she wanted to. And this is what's great about the guest work on Lex's tracks, is it seems that she makes sure to adjust her flow, and this might be conscious and it might be subconscious, but she adjusts it to feel like it goes with the guest verse. Now, whether she picks her guests in advance, writes it, knows their work, and then goes from there, or whether she hears their verses and then edits herself, it feels all too common. Maybe it's subconscious, maybe Lex is just that good. But it is fantastic because it makes every guest feature feel like a deliberate choice and feel connected. The chorus on this track is a great ride between sing-songy, simple, and a bit split up. The second verse heats up with a nice high concept. See, this is what I love about this track. This track, consistent with Party Hop and before it Self-Care, kind of edges more into some of the more classic themes of nerd music, and specifically nerdcore hip hop, where in the track it discusses in Lex's first verse about wishing that she could be the person that her family wanted or be a simpler person, but having this other self that she doesn't reveal, that she's frustrated with, but is potentially her true self. And then the second verse is like super high concept about having a clone and what's the morality of that. And that is fantastic and very nerdcore. And then Schaefer the Dark Lord comes in, expressing the never truly showing his true ego to anyone, not even his significant other, not even his closest friends. Great track front to back. It follows up Party Hop and Self-Care very nicely and kind of gives a backbone of kind of weird, interesting, not so much levity, though Party Hop certainly is very light, but interest and kind of ease with some of the subjects. And the nerdcore hits continue with Augmented. This subject isn't nerdcore. The packaging of it is. The packaging of a song that is set in a political accuracy of the time and a frustration and a threat that is very real to Lex the Lexicon Artists and a number of women and some men dealing with reproductive issues. Talks about an upgrade. It kind of sets you up for a superpower thing. It obfuscates things in high concept, and you find out it's an IUD procedure in order to control their own ability to give birth. The beat is not lighthearted. The instrumentation and the industrial influence, which I believe was done by Celine, is very aggressive and very on point and very early 90s industrial Nine Inch Nails, obvious influence. But the turn is that all these upgrades and augmentations to help fight this power infrastructure is an IUD, and now they have control of their body, is just kind of fantastic. And again, is consistent with the turns on the album. So now we get back more toward the nature of the artist and the duality and the ego problem and the shift. We get to two tracks that I feel are baked into that experience I've been talking about all album of someone who has toured for a couple years and who was really pushed to do this as a full-time position. Famous and Posturing. Famous is a club beat. It's desperate for fame. It has a little bit of taste where it's both from the artist and Fame's perspective. It sits well in the album because it's a continuation of the toxicity of things Lex cares about and wants, and her acknowledgement of those things possibly being a problem or a good thing, depending on how she could balance them, or maybe not. It would be a great live track. Posturing, on the other hand, beat-wise and hook lead-in-wise, matches with Famous, but rather than it just discussing her own desire to be Fame, it's more about the posturing of other people pretending or acting as if. This is a turn to other touring artists and other artists that work, talking about what they go through and what they've got coming out, or more importantly, pretending like they're doing more than they are. And this comes from a working artist. And it's the kind of thing that you learn when you put in the time on the road. And Lex has clearly learned these lessons, learned to spot the bullshit, and is tired of it. And so Posturing and Famous go so well because it's sort of the inner desire toxicity that might prompt Lexicon to express and move and talk in the way of the artist she wants to call out in Posturing, even though Famous is a bit more rooted in the allure of fame versus Posturing in the falseness of fame. It's fantastic. The Real Thing brings the album back to a kind of grounded root. Yes, there's a beat, there's horns, there's straight bars out the gate. It has a simple, clean chorus, and it's more of a journal of her romantic mistakes and losses taken because of it, and it's accepting the change and evolution of character, especially in the first quarter of a lifetime. It's the type of song you don't listen to the first time and are like, yeah, this bangs on the track, but you listen to it several times and you find yourself not skipping it the 100th time because it's the real thing and it really works. Schrodinger's Heart and Loss of Ego are where I hit a point in the album where I personally struggle. To be clear, these are both good songs. They're both a little lyrical miracle. They're both seriously heavy, flow-hopping, chopping, pattering trick songs. They both have a lot of clever language and a lot of clever rhyme schemes. Schrodinger's Heart instrumentally follows Real Thing really well. Loss of Ego follows that really well, although I do detect the hum might be a reference to Steven Universe. But whereas in Schrodinger's Heart, I can't quite pull the message from reading the lyrics and listening to the song, Loss of Ego is more just about it not being a song. For me, personally, Steve, it's a good song, but it's a song about the meaning of life or depth or philosophy on a level that I can't connect with as a person. But I do connect with the phony manipulation. I do connect with the good beat construction, and I do connect with the good overall song group. So it's not a skip. But if you're a person like myself, where you like your meanings to be up and your song to be decisively about a clear thing, Schrodinger's heart might be a little dense. And if you're like myself and you're not a big fan of philosophy for the sake of self-actualization, then Loss of Ego might not be your thing. They're a little different, especially after the cavalcade of very like specific concept songs or very honest journal-y history songs. But I don't think they break the album. And they certainly don't make you turn it off, which is great because Disappointment with Chris Sonko is a fantastic track 15. It's a nice acknowledgement of how people change in relationships. An acknowledgement that you might be in love with a person and then look back at yourself and you're like, how could I even have liked that person? How could I have even wanted them? And it's a less positive view of past relationships, but not a wholly negative one. Having Chris drop a verse also adds that duality that Lex is so good at with this album. There's almost an implication that from their perspective, this is the way, and then perhaps Chris is rapping from the opposite person's perspective. It's not spelled out, but it is implied that that could be true. And that really works for the track overall. It creates balance, and it stays consistent with Lex the Lexicon Artists' kind of self-acknowledgement of flaw. And finally, the last track, Retcon Artist, which is the ultimate self-acknowledgement of flaw, is the perfect last track beat. It's the perfect last track song. It works really well. It has a long instrumental close that is very nice to listen to. And it evolves both the beat and the flow and the energy and voice and understanding of the subject. This track moves as a good self-reference for the rest of the album, recognizing that they might just be posturing or expressing themselves, pouring themselves out in a negative way just for attention, but it might also be cathartic and necessary, and fans seem to connect to it. But what if they're just lying, and should they stop it, and can they stop it even if they want to stop it? And even now they're doing it again on an endless cycle, and it is so good. It melodically loops back at the end, closing the loop of the song subject with the music. So there we are, 16 tracks. Only 2 of them I didn't love outright. They're still good songs, they're just not my songs. And we have a very different feel from Raging Ego and a number of the other pieces and EPs that Lex the Lexicon Artists has released. Some of these tracks would play live better. Other tracks are there to be listened to and analyzed. But what we have is a growth of an artist and a sophomore album that really shows the whole way through. So what do I give this album? I'm going to give it an A-. And I only give it an A- for 2 reasons. The album is an hour long, and there are some people that simply do not have the attention span to listen through an album. It's a deliberate choice, and it's a risky choice, but I do feel like an album does not need to be an hour long. That it might be my personal critic coming in the way, but I don't think it's objectively. Number 2, there are a couple tracks that I personally will skip. And I feel like there are a couple tracks that other people will personally skip. That being said, A- is the highest score I've ever given. I wish I had released anything album-wise that I'd consider an A- that had so little filler and all this deliberate talent and decision-making and construction that it would be considered of the best, which it absolutely is. It's stronger on all fronts than Raging Ego. It's a better album cohesively than Raging Ego, and that is the point of a sophomore album. You can find more of Lex's music on thelexiconartist.com. If you click music up in the top menu, you can also listen to them on Apple, iTunes, Spotify. Of course, you can find it on Bandcamp. And you can listen to the number of tracks that she's released before and will release after. This has been a fantastic album listen. I'm grateful to be able to have dove into it so deeply, and I've been rewarded for it by hearing the songs over and over again. Thank you very much, Lex the Lexicon Artists. My name has been Steve. You've been listening to Nerd Music and Judgment, a Dying of Exposure series. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Dying of Exposure, as well as go to our website, dyingofexposure.com, and like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. What do you think is the best song on this album? You can stream the whole thing without dropping a penny, though she absolutely deserves your money. And what are your favorite tracks? Do you disagree with me about Schrodinger's Heart, Loss of Ego? Or are there other tracks that didn't connect with you? I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my thoughts on this album as I deep dove track to track, really breaking out my theories on it. And I can't wait to hear your opinions.